House prices have risen nearly 1,000% since 1983, while wages only rose 287%. Can this possibly go on forever? In the UK, every incoming government tends to set a new house building target. Housing supply is a persistent issue. Home ownership, affordability, social housing shortages, and rising rents keep it near the top of the political agenda. Labour in 1997 under Tony Blair pledged to increase house building, particularly affordable homes, and later set a target of 3 million new homes by 2020. This was announced under Gordon Brown in 2007. The Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition government in 2010 focused more on planning reform and schemes like Help to Buy, but still set aspirations for higher housing delivery. The Conservative government from 2015 onwards set various targets, including 300,000 new homes a year. Labour 2024 under Keir Starmer, with Rachel Reeves as Chancellor and Angela Rayner as Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Minister at the time, pledged 1.5 million homes over 5 years. That's about 300,000 per year, with a focus on new towns and reforming planning. Every government has failed to meet their pledges, and Labour under Keir Starmer is also on track not to meet their pledge of 1.5 million new homes. The fact that both parties, whether Labour or Conservative, when they come into power, one of the first things they do is set out their agenda on home building reveals the political capital in houses in the UK. In Britain, home ownership is more than just a financial decision, it's a cultural aspiration tied to security and status. Unlike some European countries where long-term renting is normal. In the UK, renting is often seen as temporary, a step toward buying. This deep-rooted belief has made rising house prices politically explosive, shaping debates for decades. It also explains why governments, regardless of party, regardless of where on the political spectrum that government sits, they all consistently promise to expand access to home ownership. There is a trend in the housing market of houses becoming less affordable, which has led to people asking the question, why has housing become unaffordable in the UK? It is somewhat of a silent property crash happening, not in prices, but in affordability. If we go back in time 40 years to 1983, the average house price in the UK was £26,000. 10 years later, the average house price in 1993 had risen by 115% to around £56,000. Looking forward another decade to 2003, and the average house price was now up 123% to £125,000. Stepping forward again to 2013, following the global financial crisis, the average price had increased by just 32% to £165,000. Finally, looking back over the last decade, the average house price is now around £280,000, an increase of 70% on prices just 10 years ago. Looking at this 40-year period as a whole, we started with the average house price sitting at £26,000, and we are left with an average house today price of £280,000, an increase of 976%. Interestingly, if we use the Bank of England's inflation calculator, goods and services that cost £26,000 in 1983 now cost £81,000 in November 2022, the equivalent of a 211% increase. This means that the price of the average house in the UK has risen 4.6 times more than the CPI inflation. As a result, it's no wonder house prices are often the hot topic of conversation and long-term affordability is being called into question. So here is a summary of house price growth. In 1983, the average house price in the UK was £26,000. In 1993, the average house price in the UK had risen 115% to £56,000. In 2003, the average house price in the UK had risen 123% to £125,000. In 2013, the average house price in the UK had risen 32% to £165,000. In 2023, the average house price in the UK had risen 70% to £280,000. Data starts to be recorded digitally towards the end of the 1990s, and we can revert to Statista for the average salary data, which was £21,124 in 2003. This figure rose again to £27,011 in 2013, and finally to £33,000 at the end of 2022. In 1983, the average salary in the UK was £8,528. In 1993, the average salary in the UK had risen 108% to £17,784. In 2003, the average salary in the UK had risen 19% to £21,124. In 2013, the average salary in the UK had risen 28% to £27,011. In 2023, the average salary in the UK had risen 22% to £33,000. Just a quick glance at these average salary figures shows that there was significant growth in the decade up to 1993 before wages stagnated for the next 30 years. In fact, at no point in each of these data steps have salaries increased faster than house prices. That's the affordability crash right there. Today, the average first-time buyer is in their mid-30s, often relying on parental help to get on the ladder. Deposit requirements have ballooned. In the 1990s, a 10% deposit on an average home was around £5,600. Today, a 10% deposit is £28,000, almost a year's gross salary for many people. This has created the phenomenon known as the bank of mum and dad, where parental wealth determines whether someone can buy a home. Rental costs have risen alongside house prices. In many parts of the UK, monthly rent consumes 30 to 40% or more of disposable income, making it even harder to save for a deposit. The result? A generation locked out of home ownership. Whilst those who bought before the boom sit on enormous paper wealth, the divide is generational, geographical, and deeply political. Now the question is why house prices rose so much. Several factors explain the relentless rise in UK house prices over the last 4 decades. First, supply is limited. The UK's planning system is notoriously restrictive. Greenbelt protections around major cities and long, drawn-out planning approvals mean that new housing supply has never kept pace with demand. Second, population growth and migration. In 1983, the UK population was about 56.36 million, and by 2023, it had risen to roughly 68.27 million. That's nearly 12 million people more in just 4 decades. Rising numbers of people, especially in London and the South East, have added huge pressure on the housing market. More people competing for the same limited homes inevitably drives prices up. Third, cheap credit. From the 1990s until 2021, interest rates fell sharply, making mortgages more affordable and allowing buyers to borrow more. This fueled house price growth. In fact, the lowest rate in the Bank of England's 300-year history was set on the 19th of March 2020 at just 0.10%. That era of ultra-cheap credit poured fuel on the housing market, pushing prices to levels many could no longer realistically afford. Fourth, government schemes. Policies like Help to Buy were supposed to make housing more affordable, but in practice they often just gave buyers more money to bid with, which inflated prices even further. Finally, cultural factors. In the UK, owning a home isn't just about shelter, it's about status, security and success. This cultural desire with home ownership means demand stays high even when prices look out of reach. Now we've gotten to this point in the video to ask the question, can this trend continue? Of course, no one has a crystal ball, but there are several possible scenarios. Scenario 1, prices keep rising slowly. If supply remains tight and demand is strong, prices may continue to rise, but not at the same explosive pace we saw in the past. We could see gradual increases of 1 to 3% per year, broadly in line with inflation. This would preserve house values, but would not solve the affordability crisis. Scenario 2, stagnation. Prices could flatline while wages slowly catch up. This has happened before in countries like Japan, where housing values plateaued for years. In this scenario, affordability improves gradually, but those hoping for dramatic falls in prices may be disappointed. Scenario 3, correction or crash. If debt levels become unsustainable, or if interest rates stay high for too long, house prices could fall sharply. A deep recession, rising unemployment, or credit tightening could cause a 10 to 20% correction. This would be painful for existing homeowners, but would open opportunities for first-time buyers. One of the starkest aspects of the UK housing story is the generational divide. Baby boomers bought homes in the 1970s and 1980s when prices were low relative to wages. They've enjoyed decades of rising equity, often using property as a pension substitute. Younger generations, however, face much higher barriers. Home ownership rates among 25 to 34-year-olds have collapsed from 65% in the 1990s to around 40% today. This isn't just an economic issue, it's a political one. Generational inequality in housing is reshaping voting patterns, with younger voters increasingly disillusioned with both main parties. Housing has become one of the defining political issues of the 21st century. History suggests UK housing has always found a way to rise, but this gap between wages and prices may not be sustainable forever. Affordability has already crashed, even if prices haven't. The question isn't just whether prices can keep rising, but whether society can withstand the consequences if they do. So what do you think will happen to the housing market? Will prices keep rising? Will we see a stagnation, or is a crash inevitable? Let us know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, comment and subscribe for more.